And what I've been doing for a number of years now, I was just trying to keep track this morning. It's been about 6 years that I've been teaching a class by the name of Design Strategy. And the whole premise of that is to help professional designers think through the strategic relevance of design and how to position themselves within their respective organization. What we're going to be doing through this workshop is a lot of self-reflective exercises, but specifically in respect to the strategic context of design and how you might go about articulating your respective value in your organization. I gave a similar workshop to this through, if you're familiar with the Design Management Institute, and I gave that workshop up in Chicago, and I had a lot of executives come in. It was a very similar conversation. So I've had companies come in and run projects through my course, and then following those, I would actually consult with these executives and their companies, because an ongoing conversation in companies, what relevance does design have? How do you get executives to understand why designers are of value, to invest in that function within their organization, and elevate the voice of designers in a manner that extends beyond just aesthetic considerations. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I will forewarn you, I just had one of my former design students tell me, we were having a conversation, he said, "Travis, you're getting a little too professorial. So you can expect me talking too much and too much text on my slides." I freely admit that. And you can expect a very sad Miro board that we'll be going to for our exercises. But they're really just meant to be prompts for you to think about what I'm presenting to you, and then come back together and have a conversation as a group. So that's the idea here, okay? So without further ado, I'm going to share my slides, and give me one moment, I'll do that. And sorry if you get this kind of psychedelic thing going on for a moment. That happened last time, will probably happen again. There we go, boom, okay. So what I'm talking about today, and hopefully you can all see this, is again communicating the value and strategic relevance of design. Where this whole conversation came from, we actually had a faculty member who had been a visiting scholar in Hong Kong, and they had a strategic design track. And they brought it back and they said, "Travis, could you teach a class called Design Strategy?" And I said, "What is that exactly?" And they didn't really have a good answer. And what was interesting to me is my background is in business analytics, but then I ended up getting my PhD in design, really, but HCI design. And it became very evident to me that designers were trying to get a foothold in strategic conversations in their companies. And I had a lot of design students, grad students specifically, who were interested in sort of foregoing what they saw as more mundane, trivial aspects of design and elevating themselves professionally within their organization. And so that's what ended up being my dissertation, and I've been studying that ever since and teaching on it. So without further ado, let's jump into what I'll be talking about today. So we'll get into a little bit about what design is seen as a profession currently, how to effectively convey the value of design in your organization, the designer's role, and by the designer, I mean really what you see functionally as your role within your organization, distinguishing design strategy and strategic design from design, if you draw any distinction. Also, the importance of success metrics and how to go about trying to measure your value. And again, by the way, I don't mean to imply that I have any definitive answers here today. This is really more of a discussion, because it's going to be a statement of how you see yourself in your organization and what you know to be true within your respective organization. So I'll be citing several books, many of which I suspect that you've seen before. Change by Design. Some people cite Tim Brown as coming up with this notion of design thinking. He didn't. It had been around for decades prior, but it was really popularized by this book, or through this book, Change by Design. It started to get organizations thinking about how design thinking might be of value. And then these are the two books that I use, this one and the following one. But if you've not seen this book before, A Fine Line by Hartman Essinger, Frog Design, this is really a conversation about how designers should have a more strategic voice, whereas this book by Roger Martin, who's dean out of the Rothman School in Canada, is a conversation about how business professionals should embrace design and engage in design thinking. Now, I would argue that this book really did a lot of damage, and I'll make my argument for that to frame your thinking on this subject, because it started to take professionals who were not professionally trained designers down this design thinking path. And they started to go through design thinking workshops and then call themselves design thinkers. And for industry, it started to conflate design and design thinking. And there was a lot of danger in that, which I'll get to. So another book, The Strategic Designer by Dave Holston, you can take a look at that. I think it's a pretty good book. I think it subordinates designers to business professionals a bit too much, but this is the most recent book that I've been using. If you haven't seen this, I'll show you some frameworks out of this book. There's nothing, again, universal out of this book, but it gives some interesting frameworks to facilitate designers engaging in strategic thinking for their organization. And then last but not least, I teach entrepreneurship. I think there's a lot of overlap between design thinking and entrepreneurship and product management, which I'll touch on just a bit. I also teach a product management class. And this book does a good job of trying to help people think. I'm sorry?
Your voice is a little bit unstable.
My voice is unstable?
Yeah, sometimes it's louder, sometimes it's just smaller.
Okay. Let me see if I can lean in just a bit. Is that any better? And I'll slow down, see if my computer can keep up my voice.
Yeah, now it sounds better.
Okay. Okay, great. So, but this book is very useful when it comes to helping designers think about how they might put forth relevant proposals to businesses. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because I'm going to be citing quite a bit of this throughout my presentation. So this is one of my favorite quotes about design because I think it's just a simple encapsulation of what design entails, at least in my mind. It's about shaping experience. And so the problem that I see designers having when it comes to constructing strategic proposals is strategy in the context of organizations really comes down to a conversation about business. And in turn, it comes down to reductive thinking in respect to operational efficiency and profitability. And the danger in that is that I would argue that human experience, humanity in general, is irreducible. And so that therein the challenge lies for designers when it comes to having a strategic conversation. Very similar to this quote from Steve Jobs, right? You can't just ask customers what they want and then try to give that to them. By the time you get it built, they'll want something new. This is something that's been said many times over by this quote from Steve Jobs.
Hey, Travis, real quick.
Yeah.
It sounds like your audio is still going in and out.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not sure why it's doing that. It doesn't seem to have any reason or rhyme to it. So I don't know if we just all stay on mute and then maybe you just turn your volume up if we want to try that.
Okay. Okay. Let's see what happens here.
What did you do earlier to fix your audio? It was doing something different, but can you do that again?
Actually, I didn't do anything. I just thought good thoughts. So I actually didn't do anything. I turned down my speakers at one point. How about that? Is that better at the moment?
It's hard to tell because
It's just
so random.
Okay. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, my laptop definitely does not like butter. That much I know to be true. So I'm not sure why exactly. I don't know if it's some kind of driver conflict or something. I'm not sure.
I mean, I can, if it's okay with everyone, I can still, even when you do go down, I can still hear you. So if we keep ourselves on mute and then we turn our volumes up, besides it blasting occasionally. Is that all right? Because I can still understand you. It just goes like this.
Okay. Yeah. Trying to think what else I might be able to do.
Do you have headphones, perhaps? Would that be headphones with a mic?
No, I have tried a mic on this computer, but I think it has. Let me see if I can just I'll remove my mouse even and see if that just eliminates further conflicts. I think it has to do with my USB ports and try and just pick up on peripherals. I think that's of it. So.
Do you have your webcam turned off, or what are you doing?
No, I don't at the time. It's just my integrated webcam.
Okay.
Do I sound okay at the moment?
Yeah, you sound. I mean, your speed is fine. It's just the volume.
It just sounds muffled sometimes, and then it's like on and off.
I'm trying to think. I don't have a single thing open outside of what we're doing right now. Let me see if there's anything else I can do here. I think I'm out of things to turn off at the moment.
Okay, let me, I can communicate with Poppy and see if she has ideas in the background.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to just keep trying?
I wonder, what are you presenting? And if someone took over, if I could take over screen sharing, you just tell me to switch slides, maybe that might help. And try that. I can just literally take over.
Okay, well, let's do this. So let's just forgo this. I'm about to jump everyone into Miro, and maybe I can resolve this in the meantime.
Okay.
How's that sound? Okay. So let's jump out of this, and I'll stop my sharing. Okay, here we are. We're back. So you can see me and you can hear me okay?
We can see you, yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can just port my slides into Google. And maybe if I share through my browser as opposed to having an external app, that will be better. So, okay. So, without further ado, what I want you to do at the moment is go out to Miro, and let's assume that this shows up okay. And as I forewarned you, there's nothing all that visually enticing here. But take a look at this first exercise that I have for you. This is the same exact thing that I took executives in Chicago through when I ran this workshop. And I want you to start to give thought to, I mean, some of this stuff is just introductory stuff, but I want you to go through this self-reflective exercise for probably about, there's not much to this, about 5 minutes, and I want to have a discussion. In the meantime, I'll see if I can load my slides to Google. But just what's your professional title? I'll tell you, I talk to my students a lot about this in respect to what titles matter and how do they matter. I've coached a lot of executives and companies in respect to how they frame their profession in regard to their title. Could you summarize what you do in your position, specifically in respect to, depending on the nature of your role in design, do you consider yourself to be a strategic designer or design strategist? And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't think that term even has any meaning, that's perfectly fine. But I just want you to reflect on that. Have you ever heard the title design strategist? What are your thoughts regarding that position? What is the essence of design as a profession? And is design as a discipline experiencing an existential crisis? That seems like a pretty profound, deep, or maybe dire statement. But I've actually had professionals on the coast say that to me, that design is actually going through sort of this existential crisis in respect to what do people think of it? What does it mean? Do companies even get it? Is it sort of the superficial investment that they're making? So that's what I ask you to do now. So for the next 5 minutes, as I try to clean up my slides here and get them not interrupting me so much, if you could just engage in that process for yourself, and it'd be great if you could post it here. I've been through Miro just enough to know that we can share our thoughts, but really this is meant to be a self-reflective exercise. So do that. I'll keep track of time, and in the meantime, let me see if I can get my slides loaded to Google. Okay.
Thank you, Travis.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that. Your volume is much better now.
Is it? Yeah, I think it has something to do with the way I'm sharing my slides. Let me see if I can make that better.
Oh, as soon as I said that.
Oh, it got worse. Maybe that won't have anything to do with it then.
Travis, are you Mac or PC? I don't know if you can.
I'm muted because I'm typing.
Uh,
I'm PC.
yeah, I think if you go to your settings, I think they have an option for noise suppression. That might help. I think it's in the, I don't have PC, but I think there is, like in the hardware and sound area, I think they have an option for noise suppression.
Yeah, well, thanks. This is my work computer. I run courses and I run meetings. I have limited administrative access to really play around with the settings.
Okay.
But I've been, everything seems to be fine in general for me. I've worked on Butter with Poppy before. It does not like Butter.
Yeah.
At all. I mean, like it really dislikes it. Let me see if I can load my slides to Google, and maybe that will help just a bit, not having a separate app to share.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can do.
Awesome.
Again, so sorry about the audio interruptions and the tech.
No, it's totally fine. I was just curious.
No, I love that research. Awesome.
Okay. I've loaded my slides to Google. I have no idea what it did in the process, but we'll make do. The content's going to be there, so.
Awesome.
Okay, everyone, let's just another minute, and then we'll take a few minutes to have a conversation. I'm most interested in speaking about the last question there. Or really the last two, but by the way, at the moment, is my volume a bit better?
So far, yeah.
Okay, I don't know what's going on, like, driver-wise. Let's see here. Let's see a question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Madison?
Sorry, a technical question. Tips on best navigating in Miro?
Great question. You know what? I'm really not very good at using Miro, so I'm probably the last person you'd want to ask.
You can hit the space bar and it'll make a hand and you can kind of grab and move the screen that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know about any driver conflicts at this point, but otherwise I've got nothing open except Chrome. So
I wonder if
it's
it's
like good thoughts.
always good thoughts. I wonder if it's a microphone specific thing.
I don't know. I've had
Oh.
it happen in the past. I've had it happen when I was teaching in the past, but it was always a driver conflict.
Mm.
So I don't know what's going on right now. Well, I'll just keep at it as long as everyone's game. Okay, everyone, thanks. I see you still working out here, and that's fantastic. But so I'm just curious, well, I'll get into why I'm asking this question later, but I'm curious now, would someone care to share their definition of essentially what is the essence of design? And I will just cue you up a little bit here. Why I'm asking this is oftentimes I've had conversations with designers about strategy, and they'll say to me, well, that's not true to design. Well, to suggest that something's true to design implies that you have a clear sense of what design entails, or what makes design design. So what makes design design relative to other professions, say business and engineering as examples? Let's see here. I can't imagine anyone wants me to cold call them, although I do see names.
For me, when I think about design, I think about creation with intention. And then whatever your intention is, kind of crafts your specialty.
Yeah, I see that. Great, thanks for sharing. Others?
Kind of build on what was just previously said, as designing with intention, problem solving, wanting to design for someone other than yourself.
Okay, so designing for the other, like this gets into empathy, I'm assuming, Kimber, and things.
In a way, kind of, I guess, like the big thing, the difference between art or design is when it's art, you can kind of just, whatever reason it's for you or possibly to invoke emotion solely, but you have that intention. But if it's design, it's not necessarily, it's you're designing with somebody else in mind, not just yourself.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks for sharing. So let me ask you, get to the next question here. So let me rephrase this question. I've had some designers tell me that we're in a design bubble, and we could have a discussion about what that means. But the way I'd phrase it is undergoing an existential crisis, which is to say that people are challenging the very core of what design is. How do we feel about that? I guess a simple binary answer would suffice. Yeah, you do agree or you do not agree, but I'm curious how you feel about the notion that design is undergoing such challenges.
I think that design kind of lends itself to people who, like you said, question everything. So of course it's going to lead to questioning our reality, questioning us, questioning what we do.
What do you think about that? Thank you for sharing. How do you feel about the notion that design as a profession itself is undergoing challenges where people are essentially chipping away at what makes design design? We're going to spend this entire conversation getting into this, so I'm not looking for a robust answer here, but I'm just curious if that's something that resonates with you or not.
Well, I mean, I think right now we're kind of like in this technological like advancement, and so that's pushing the limits of what we can do, what mediums previously existed, and it kind of like lends us to challenge ourselves. But we've always done that with art and design, and just kind of in evolving as a society, we've kind of keep pushing the limits. It's just kind of human nature in a way.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. In the interest of time and technical challenges and the risk that you may not hear half of what I say going forward, I probably should just jump ahead. So let me see if I can share and do a better job of sharing my slides. Bear in mind, I loaded these to Google, so who knows what they're going to look like. Let's see here. There we go. You can see this okay? And you can hear me okay? Fantastic, progress. We are making progress. Okay, so what you start to see, and a lot of people were talking about this, that design, the notion of design, at least in the traditional sense of industrial design, was being commoditized. And so designers started to embrace this design thinking movement. What was fascinating to me was that I was seeing a lot of my MBA students. I taught business students for a number of years. Suddenly they would take a design thinking workshop, and they too were now design thinkers. They actually would have that on their LinkedIn profile. And all my grad design students were telling me they too were design thinkers. And I thought, interesting. From a professional standpoint, where does that position you in your organization? If you are a design thinker and no longer a designer, actually, I would even have grad students go so far as to tell me, and I think I have some students on this call right now who were telling me at the time, I'm not really a designer, I'm a design thinker. I thought, wow, that's fascinating. I've never heard someone distance themselves from their own profession. That's wild. So let's see if I can, there we go. So you've seen this before, the Stanford D School, the design thinking framework. We have one at IU as well. This is actually comes from Dr. Ellie Blevis. I'm sorry, I know the format is going to be wonky here because I loaded everything very haphazardly to Google. But the idea here being that you essentially have a design process, right? That this is something that design thinking for designers really was about trying to get their organizations to embrace design in the strategic realm and elevate design from just aesthetic considerations. I don't know if this is PC anymore. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone, but my students used to tell me I don't want to be the one putting lipstick on a pig. They'd say that quite often. And I'd say, what do you mean by that? And they'd say, well, I don't want to be the one brought in on the back end of the conversation. And I said, well, that makes perfect sense. But, the problem is that design thinking has been so broadly adopted at this point that everyone thinks they can do it. So how do you actually retain your core competency and convey what you're doing to your organization in a meaningful way? So I don't know who on here knows John Colco, but I went through a workshop with him before. And design thinking, as he described it, was empathy with users, a discipline of prototyping, and tolerance for failure chief among them. I think it needs to be a little bit broader than that. Designers started to gravitate to trying to solve problems that were beyond traditionally within their purview. So what you had happening was, and I went through many a workshop where designers were saying, design applies to everything. But as I said before, that also lent itself to, I went through a lot of workshops with designers as well, who were telling me that they were suddenly being told by their leadership team in their organization that they needed to run design thinking workshops. And they started to feel as if they were essentially handing their profession over to non-designers, which I certainly would not advocate for. So you get, this is all around the same time. Granted, this is 10 years ago now, but all these conversations are still ongoing. Bruce Newsom, he wrote a very famous piece essentially saying that, you know, design thinking, this is from Roger Martin, but design thinking started to get biased by organizations and their need to work toward efficiency. So much so that people were concluding 10 years ago that design thinking as a movement was completely dead, that there really wasn't any value in it in organizations, and that was not the path forward for designers. I tend to be of the same mind. I believe that designers should not be trying to create a rote process when it comes to design or create some linear thinking for others to embrace design, but rather designers themselves should be elevated to having a seat at the strategic decision-making table, so many designers have written about. And how do we do that? How do we position designers to be more engaged actively in strategic conversations within their organizations? So this gets back to what I said before. Part of the conversation that I would have with my grad design students through all the classes that I taught is they would be the ones challenging me and saying to me, okay, Travis, this is fine, but you're asking us to think about organizational constraints and organizational considerations. These are not things that designers should be doing. Okay, fine. If designers shouldn't be doing those things, what should designers be doing? If that's not what design is, what is design? So again, I warned you, I think in words. I don't, you know, my background's an analyst, so what can I tell you? But really the point here is, and this is across these different books, everyone's saying the same thing essentially, that designers need to be more mindful of being engaged in these strategic conversations within their organizations. Now, you may not agree with that, and I have my own misgivings about that because it's a very slippery slope. But when I would engage with what you might consider traditional designers, and what I mean by that is designers who really aren't aspiring to inform the business considerations or anything else within their organizations, and I'd ask them, how is it that you're designing for these organizational considerations and constraints within your organization? I would often be told, well, I don't. That's not my job. I essentially do my job, and then I hand it off to someone else, and then they do whatever they do, and that's the extent of it. And I'd say to them, didn't you tell me that you wanted to be involved in those strategic conversations in your organization? And they say, well, yes, of course. And I'd say, that thing that you just said you don't want anything to do with, that is that's what you said, that's what you want. That strategic conversation, that's what's happening on the other side of the wall where you're throwing your design. That's precisely the conversation that you need to be engaged in. So here's my second exercise for you. And hopefully you're hearing me a little bit better now. Sorry for the wonkiness of my formatting, but we'll get through this. So what I'm going to do at the moment is stop my share. And I'm going to jump back. Hopefully you can see me okay. And going back to the Miro board, I've got another not so aesthetically exciting exercise for you. And that is this. Just if you could just scroll right over to the second exercise. What I want you to consider here is these different terms. Now, what I've typically had my students say to me in the past is, well, you seem to think that there's a difference between these terms. And I say to them, I'm not telling you there is a difference. What I'm suggesting to you is that you should be mindful of these terms. And then I have students say to me, who cares? This is all an academic exercise. And I say, really? Because I'm here to tell you that in organizations, words matter, semantics matter. The way in which you go about presenting who you are and what you do matters a great deal. So having the sense of how people are using these terms and what they mean to you does matter. So what I ask you to do now for the next, I'd say I'll give you probably half the time, and hopefully we can have a discussion beyond that. And I think timing wise, I'll be just fine. Is what are your thoughts regarding design thinking, just in general? What does it mean to you, and whether or not you think that's actually useful? I know that isn't quite as important in respect to, well, tactically, it's not as important to designers now as it had been just even a few years ago. But what are your thoughts regarding strategic design? What are your thoughts regarding design strategy? And again, if you think those two words are the exact same thing or terms, that's fine. Do you draw a distinction? If so, what is that distinction? And do you draw any distinction between what I'm calling here traditional design and design strategy? Now, again, I almost always, there's a method to my madness. I'm leading you down a path. So take a few minutes and give thought to these terms if you would, and we'll come back together, okay? And I'll just sit here staring awkwardly at you in the meantime. Actually, that's not true. I'm going to go grab some coffee, then I'll come back and stare awkwardly at you. Okay, everyone, let's give it another minute. Okay, I'm reading some of what you're posting here. So interesting. So executing design in a strategic way. So I'm not sure, I'm seeing guests here, so I don't want to call anyone out, but I'm curious, the person who posted that wouldn't mind elaborating a bit. Or perhaps I can just, oh, great.
So as I was reading the terms strategic design, that's what came to mind. So how you execute your design, how you go about that.
And what do we mean? It's perfectly, you're setting me up so beautifully for what I'm about to discuss, but I have a slide that essentially states what you just said, but in respect to user experience. So what do we mean by strategic? You know, I used to have students say to me, Travis, how do we be more strategic? And you know, it's something we toss around a lot, like, hey, we should be more creative. Let's be more innovative. It's like saying, let's do more, or let's be better. So what do we mean by that when we say let's do it in a strategic way?
Are we saying like let's try to be intentional and like let's try to validate everything that we're doing with research?
Well, I'd say certainly that's one definition of strategic, without question. I can tell you, and I know, by the way, I only see a fraction of you. It's just like when I teach class, and so if you have anything to share, please share. I don't want it to just be me speaking. But I had the same question when I was engaged in my research and speaking to professionals, and what became very evident to me is that for them, strategy really meant business goals, really. So because strategic thinking doesn't, I think this is something that I'm very much, maybe you've already picked up on this from me, I'm very much into semantic analysis. So I'm looking constantly at what are we saying, how are we saying it, and what does this mean in the broader context. And when someone says to me, I'm a strategic designer, it begs the question, well, what would be a non-strategic designer? What does that mean? I mean, why are you qualifying yourself as being strategic or not strategic? And the more that I spoke to professionals across the spectrum, and design strategy really took root on the coast more than in the Midwest. And what I realized very quickly is that what they meant by strategy is I'm mindful of my organizational goals and constraints and considerations, and so I'm placing my designs within those considerations. That's what I mean by strategy. The strategy really doesn't have any meaning unless you set a destination, right? When we say someone's strategic, what do we really mean? They set a goal and they were efficient and effective in achieving that goal. So, of course, if someone says to you they're strategic, in my view of the world, the first question you should ask is strategic in what? Like, what were you efficient at achieving? And for strategic designers, what I came to discover through my research is that what they really mean is they're strategic in contextualizing their designs in respect to their organizational considerations and constraints. That's really what it came down to. So let's see what else we have here. So again, in the interest of time, because I have a couple of other reflective exercises for you, and I hope that you leave this feeling as if you have something to take back to your organization, because again, what I will end with is an exercise that was brought to me by an executive in a company. She happened to have been, she had been a guest speaker in a project client, one of my classes, and she asked for my help helping her think through how to position herself in her company. So do we draw any distinction between, and again, this is my term, no, it's not anything that's universally accepted or acknowledged, but between traditional design and design strategy or strategic design, if you prefer, do we draw any distinction between the two? And by the way, I've had students say to me, well, this is such an academic conversation. I said, really? You know, companies hire design strategists. That's a real position that exists. So I'm not making it up.
Maybe the businesses don't even know what they're hiring for.
I certainly would agree with that sentiment, yes.
I kind of took strategic design versus design strategies. Action items would probably be a little bit different. Strategic design being more business minded, and design strategy being more design minded, because I couldn't think of a better word. Or like maybe more art focused as like action items.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. So I'll tell you, when I draw a distinction between those terms, but I didn't meet anyone, nor have I met anyone professionally. Strategic design, design strategy is they're essentially synonymous. But I'll tell you the challenge, and you'll feel it more in the next exercise, push them a little further and say, why do you feel compelled to call yourself strategic? Does that mean that designers aren't strategic in their thinking? Because I can tell you, when I taught business students, I never had a business student say to me, I'm a strategic business person. It's innate in the profession. They're just like, in their minds, it goes without saying, obviously I'm strategic. And so that, of course, leads you to conclude, okay, there's something that designers think in respect to their profession or the way their profession is perceived that leads them to qualify their role as strategic or not. And so that, of course, is a very fascinating conversation for me to have.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, especially because design for a while was just making things pretty. So like any kind of design strategy that might have been afforded to designers a couple decades ago doesn't feel like it's being utilized in that way anymore. So the retaliation is to make strategy part of the title.
Right, I agree. I totally agree. And then the question becomes, though, and this is dangerous, well, I'm going to steal my own thunder. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to jump back to my overly verbose slides and lead us into our next exercise, because I think we'll get into a deeper conversation. We'll nicely set us up for the end, although I know I'm running a bit behind here, so I'm going to jump ahead. So keep at the mirror board if you'd like to, but I am going to get back to sharing my slides. There we go. Okay, I think we're making progress here. So these different terms that I've tossed around quite a bit. So this again, Tim Brown and Roger Martin. There's all sorts of writing on this out there, and I won't get into this too far if you don't know who they are. But they went so far, and it was in a Harvard Business Review article, where they started to claim that design thinking was an entirely new discipline, distinct from design. Now that, to me, seems, and these are really prominent thinkers in the space. This isn't some extremist outlier in this conversation. These are very prominent thinkers. And I started to feel, and this is only a few years ago, this is back in 2016, in which in, scholarly circles, this is like a blip. So, and if you don't think that this is carried over into more widespread adoption, I was meeting with music faculty member, granted it's still academia, but we went out to breakfast one day and he said, "Hey Travis, have you heard of this design thinking thing?" And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, it's like, this really up and coming thing, and I'm going to start to build my programming around it. I said, yeah, well, I teach design students. That's what they do. He said, no, I'm talking about design thinking. And he really, as straight-faced as you can imagine, said, no, not design thinking. I said, that's what designers do. That design thinking is part of design. And his response was, I'm not making this up at all, and nor am I being melodramatic. He said to me, no, I know what they do. I'm talking about design thinking. I thought, wow, what a wild world in which we live, where design thinking has been so successful that it's essentially had this happen, where design and design thinking have been split into two different fields. And I thought, where does this leave designers? Doesn't this essentially relegate design to doing precisely what it was that designers set out not to do by having design thinking be this sort of prominent up and coming movement? And I would argue yes. And so this is back, I'm sorry, I forget who made the comment, but this is the extent of what I've seen in respect to having people try to define what something is strategic. So this comes from UX strategy. What is UX strategy? Well, it's a strategic way to perform UX design. What does that mean? I don't know. So we get into it. So strategy is really an integrated set of choices. It's about, and I know the theme for this whole week is about sustainability, but sustainability to me is certainly beyond what we're talking about in respect to the environment, but rather it also has to do with the importance of design, the importance of the value that design provides, and ensuring that design as a profession is sustainable, and that designers actually are able to achieve that seat at the strategic decision-making table that they seek. So this, again, if you've never read Playing to Win, I think it's a great book, which I won't get into the details of that right now, but my attitude has always been, I've had many grad students ask me, so what is your view for what a strong team would look like? And I say, well, a designer is going to be on the team, as would an engineer, as would a business person. It very much looks like this Venn diagram that Marty Erickson put together for product management. Jumping ahead here, I know I'm moving very quickly, I'm sorry, but so this is from this new book that I've been using, Strategic Design. Designers using their principles, tools, and methods to influence strategic decision making. The problem that we have is back to what some of you wrote and some of you have said, is that designers historically have been relegated to aesthetic considerations. And so it's not evident to most organizations that designers should be having a voice in respect to these conversations, primarily because organizations aren't primarily focused on the human aspect of their business. It is about profitability, it's about operational efficiency. These are engineering and business conversations. They are not design conversations. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that design shouldn't be a part of that conversation. I'm actually advocating for just that, but it's not evident to organizations why designers should be involved in that conversation. So I'm going to just jump over this in the interest of time. Sorry for the formatting again, but so it's fine. There are papers written on design strategy, but they're these very broad, nebulous things like what is design strategy? In the end, it's really about merging business and creative objectives in a meaningful way. So when I talk to my students, which we'll get into here in a moment, when you're thinking about where should design and the organization end, and it's not just this juxtaposition between design and business, but it gets back to this conversation of if strategy in respect to strategic design really is about trying to position design in relative to the business goals that are the leadership is trying to achieve, then it is a conversation about where does design end and business begin, and vice versa. I've had grad design students go out and get engaged in design, like strategic design roles, and write me and say in detail, I think that I should have just got my MBA because I don't feel like I'm competitive in my industry. And my response to them is, that's because you're trying to play business. You're trying to be like MBA light, and you're a designer. And don't forget that you are. It's just a challenge for you to convey your value relative to what's going on around you. And so that's a lot of what we're talking about today. So look at that, set up. So I know I only have until 1:40, so we're going to fast track some of this. So let's see if I can be a little bit more succinct. I won't give you an entire 15 minutes, but jumping back to the Miro board, if you float over, which I will do as soon as it loads. So what do you think lies ahead for design as a profession? Should designers worry about being strategic? I've had some designers, when I go to these various workshops, say, why are we even talking about this? Who cares? It's like, well, maybe you don't care. I don't know. But what I know to be true is that I read more than my fair share of papers on designers talking about wanting to be taken more seriously in strategic conversations in their organization. That's why we're talking about this. What are the potential benefits of having a professional designer rather than a business professional serve as a strategic consultant? This is precisely what I work on with clients through my class. And this is one, and I'm telling you, when I did my research, I spoke to professional designers, I asked them this. I said, if a business professional, meaning an MBA degree holder, completed a design thinking workshop, could they do what you do? Could they rightfully do what you do? Could they claim that they're a design strategist? That flummoxed most professional designers with whom I dealt, because I'm telling you, as I would always and continue to tell my students, that if you cannot articulate what makes you different from those who are claiming to be what you are, then it's very difficult for leadership within your organization to understand why they should invest in what you do. That's reality, as harsh as it sounds. So let's take a few minutes for you to reflect on that, because I'll probably jump through quite a few slides, which I'm sure you won't mind at all, because I'd rather get you to the final exercise that I'd like you to end today's workshop on, okay? So let's take a few minutes and then we'll have a discussion. I'll get back to the slides. I'm going to do this. Let's see here. Let's do about 2 more minutes, and then we'll talk about this and try to push us forward to the last exercise. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to start reading some of this. So I agree with this comment about the falling into the trap of design thinking as a magic bullet. Back to the earlier statement about companies investing in design, I started to have quite a few students, and I heard this from not just past students, but just speakers I had, project clients, that they felt as if it was good that their companies were investing in design, but they weren't doing it in a thoughtful way. They were doing it in more of a, well, this is the cool thing to do, it's progressive, and check us out, we invested in design, but they really didn't know what to do with it, and they didn't know how to empower it, which is, again, very self-serving for me to point out that statement, because that's exactly where I want us to end up, which is just starting to think about how do you go about doing that. And by the way, if only I had definitive answers for you today, that would be a wonderful thing, but every organization is different. So that's where we're going to take this conversation, and I have about 22 minutes here for that purpose. Let's see, what else do we have? I agree with this as well, this notion of having an internal design strategist. This is precisely what led me to set up the final exercise we're going to be going through, where I've started to have people in my network reach out to me trying to, well, seeking my assistance and helping them articulate why it would be important to define design strategy function within their organization and get their leadership to invest in that. So I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts about this last statement here. So, we're talking about the fine line that exists between business thinking designers and design thinking business professionals. So now granted, it may not be true for anyone on this call. I don't know you all or know your backgrounds, but I can tell you there are a lot of programs out at universities that essentially create design strategy programs by having students take business classes, having students take design classes. So they're essentially a dual MBA design program, and that's what the program is. And so much so that I've spoken with these individuals and I asked them, well, what's the difference between what a designer would do and what you did in your program? And they say, well, I don't really know, because I don't really know what it is that designers do, because I took both classes simultaneously. So I'm curious so my background is more in business analytics. So if I come along and I say to you, now granted I have my PhD in design now, but let's say I didn't, and I say, hey, I took a design thinking workshop, so I too am a design thinker and I in turn am a design strategist. What would be your rebuttal? What would you say within your respective organization why leadership should not empower such people to have the voice that you think that you should have? And if you don't have an answer, I can just have you ponder that, but I'm curious if that's why. I hear that a lot from people, by the way. They encounter this more and more. I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that when it comes time to planning design aspects and projects, there needs to be an understanding of what work and the amount of time that it goes in there, how to iterate the low fidelity, high fidelity. And designers know that better than just someone who took a camp. Like, you have to account for that. So without the person doing the work, putting the input, like how much it takes, like, yeah, it could be quick, but there's thinking, there's all this other work that goes into it. And sometimes you just stare at a screen. Like, you can't plan without having that input.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So really an appreciation for the craft of design. Mm-hmm. I see that. I understand that. Any other thoughts? I think I saw Madison in the chat here. Let's see. Mm-hmm. So Madison, you mean that more from the standpoint that why should MBA holders be paid more, or how do designers justify getting paid as much?
Yeah, the second part. So similar to your question of why should we hire you versus an MBA? I think it's a similar question with even salary and how they search for certain candidates for certain positions.
Yeah. Well, and this gets back to my experience. So, I'll show you. I only have 18 minutes here, so I really want to get to that final exercise, and I think that I'll be okay ending you on that, because it's not really something that you can get done in a single workshop anyway. But what I'd say to you is, part of the challenge now is that I have a lot of my design students who want to become product managers, which is a hot field, and yet more often than not, they're not taken seriously for those roles, because what do product managers really have to be mindful of? The business considerations in respect to profitability, marketability, distribution, all those considerations. And they also need to be mindful of the technological underpinnings of those solutions. So they need to be thinking about the engineering and the project planning and all those things. So organizations tend to look to engineers and business professionals to do those jobs. Now, I'm certainly of the opinion that a human-centered approach, thinking more in respect to what's going to provide an optimal experience, is as important but organizations tend not to think in those terms. So anyway, thank you very much for the conversation. In the interest of time, technological snafus aside, I'm going to keep plowing ahead, and I'm going to share my screen again. So, and I have far, far, far too many slides, as I always do. So I will jump beyond that. So here we go. So I just really like to quote this again from the Strategic Design Aid Essential Practices book that I mentioned at the beginning. The designers supposedly, I think these big statements about designers no longer do this, but designers do this. I mean, right? So professionally, designers are still asked to do these things. I think this is more of an aspirational statement. The goal is for designers not to just be executing briefs as given to them, but rather being involved in crafting those briefs. I can tell you, when I met with, and I interviewed professional design strategists all around the country through my research, no one could articulate what design strategy was. They had no shared understanding of what their own profession was, and they're paid to do it. But one thing they all could say to me was that design strategy, and they were consistent in this, is about helping construct the design brief, not just following the design brief. They all consistently said that. And it really comes back to this notion of helping the organization know what should be built, not just building what they ask you to build. That's really the key there. So far too much. I'm going to jump beyond this, but it's really about taking feasibility into account. So you've seen these frameworks, which I'll jump ahead to. This is product management that people point to quite often. You see this a lot, but it's this notion of feasibility and desirability and viability. And desirability is where designers live, feasibility is where engineers live, and viability is where business professionals live. And trying to get designers, at least in strategic conversations, to be as mindful of the business viability of their decisions. I can tell you, in my many years of working with designers, when they would put forth proposals for business competitions or what have you, they were beautifully crafted, very well grounded in the market understanding and the needs of their target audience. But they very rarely were contextualized in respect to the competitive landscape or branding or any of these other considerations that go into business, which of course I'm not going to get through today in this workshop, but that is something that I teach. So any designer who wants to operate at a strategic level must understand the principles and practices around viability management, precisely what I just said. So what I researched, which no one here wants to hear about my research, but I'm going to tell you at least what I explored, is what's the essence of design, according to fledgling designers, everything I just asked you. What's the value proposition of a design strategist or a strategic designer, if you prefer, relative to a business strategist, and how to meaningfully introduce these concepts in an educational environment. This had to do with pedagogy. But this is just a framework that I introduced that really had to do with trying to walk designers. The best thing I can tell you about this framework, is just a broad conceptual framework, is trying to get designers, that little middle sort of strategic balancing conversation that I have, really was trying to get students and professionals to think about how can you meaningfully engage in all these considerations that go into strategically designing your design. So it would take me hours to go into the semantics of this, but the notion being that when you as a designer set out trying to solve a problem, you're going to naturally and rightfully think idealistically about what could be, what might be, right? You're going to diverge in your thinking. But when it comes to what's going to make sense in the course of actually introducing your design or launching your design through your company, there are a lot of strategic balancing conversations that must take place. What does it make sense for in respect to branding? What does it make sense for in respect to your product portfolio? So on and so forth. These are all conversations that I believe designers should be engaged in. And to me, that is what makes a designer versus a strategic designer different. A strategic designer has the ability to engage in a conversation regarding strategically designing or balancing their design relative to what they would ideally do. Because if you can't have that conversation, then someone else will be having it on your behalf. That's really the point. of this conversation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We don't have time for this, and don't worry about it. I will probably fill in. You don't need to worry about all this stuff for this exercise, because what it really comes down to is back to what I asked you before, is how do we retain the essence of design by design strategists? And what I mean to say there is it's a very, very slippery slope when you start to get into a conversation about, I as a designer want to better position my design in respect to profitability or in respect to operational efficiency. You're starting to get into a conversation about, it's a reductive process, right? And human nature is fuzzy and arguably largely irreducible. So how do you as a designer engage in those conversations in a meaningful way and position yourself next to other functions such as engineers and business professionals that are trained to think in those exact terms? That's precisely how they think, and that's what they're rewarded to do within your organization. So in, again, the interest of time, and I'm sorry to be so scattershot in what I'm saying to you, I'm going to jump back to the Miro board because I want you to see. I have to close my chat window, sorry about that. Here we go. So what we've got here, this last exercise that I got for you, this is, again, precisely what I walked the executives through for whom I ran this workshop in Chicago. Where this came from, I had an executive at a really large company. I can't tell you who it is, but they reached out to me because they were being told that what they did was really about product management. And her argument was, no, I'm a design strategist. That's what I trained to do. That's who I am. And so she reached out to me and said, okay, here is the framework that I'm using. Can you help me think through this for my organization? And this is precisely what she did. So let me walk you through this. So it was an organization proposal for design strategy within her company, which is to say the strategic relevance of design to try to get the leadership team to further invest in design and elevate that as a profession within her company. So she started with the definition of what it is that they do, so the aspirational goal. So what is it that design could be doing, should be doing for the organization as a function that it's not currently doing? Then in respect to execution, what are the different roles that should be defined within the organization to make that happen, to achieve that goal, whatever that goal might be? And by the way, I know we only have 8 minutes. So I'm going to spend all my time on this. And I know I have a lightning talk on Friday, and I have other slides. So you know what? If you have any interest in hearing more from me, you can come to the lightning talk, and I'll touch on a lot of what I have to say, because I'd much prefer leaving you with something that I think might be of use to you and your organization. So, and then the process, key steps, tactics, as in, you know, what should the business processes look like in respect to trying to institutionalize design? Because it is, for many organizations, design is sort of just this thing they do, something they can tell their shareholders they invested in. Areas of excellence. So what are the strengths currently of this design group that you have within your organization? And then also, what are the weaknesses, areas for improvement? This is essentially what she used to break down a strategic proposal for her organization, to go back and say, look, I as a designer am currently not being fully utilized, and I can provide far more value to the organization as a designer. And so when you're thinking about your role within your respective company, to the extent that you want to be taken more seriously and be better appreciated strategically within your organization, you have to define what those roles are, but you also have to articulate to your company what it is that design as a functional area can provide in respect to value for the good of the organization. So, and again, I don't know if everyone's going to be comfortable writing these things about their own organization. You know, that's a little bit tricky, but what I'm going to do now is just ask you to, let's do this. We only have 7 minutes. Rather than having you write out here, if you'd like to, please start doing that. But I'm curious currently, is there anyone that would be willing to share. I can't see your name, so you don't have to worry about divulging your identity. That's going through a similar exercise right now, because I hear from organizations all the time that this is an ongoing conversation.
Travis, one of my questions when I saw your talk was thinking about how you articulate the tangible, quantifiable ROI of design. So if I want to build out a design strategy team and that's going to cost X and this is how it's going to save Y, I think I struggle with that and wondered, how do you approach that conversation, and is there even another way to connect what the business values to what design can provide?
Yeah, that's a challenge because in the last part of my slides, which I'll spend all of my lightning talk talking about that, because I think that's where a lot of people go. But it's a very difficult, I guess this goes without saying, but I'll say it. It's a difficult conversation to have, because how do you do that? Well, you can talk about it in more qualitative net promoter score-esque kind of success metrics. But to the extent that you say, if I change this color scheme or this interface or this typography, that is going to result in a 10% increase in sales year over year or something to that effect, it's dangerous, because you start to really turn every single conversation you're having in respect to consumer engagement into a dollar and cents argument. Now, you can do that, and I'm not suggesting that you can avoid doing that. What I am suggesting is, in my view of the world, you should avoid doing that. That you should, as a designer, try to keep the conversations more in the realm of brand perception, as an example, right? Like positive affinity or perception from a consumer standpoint of your brand, or the way in which consumers perceive you relative to the competition, keeping it more in the experience realm as opposed to trying to get it into a reductive conversation about metrics. Because there's a tendency, if you actually read The Strategic Designer by Dave Holston, there is that whole book. My problem with the book is that it seems to be pushing designers in a direction which is exactly that. It's like, designers, you only have the ability to be taken seriously if every single thing that you do is boiled down to I can sell X number of units more if you do what I'm suggesting that needs to be done. And I think it's incumbent upon designers to present to their leadership teams that there's a broader set of metrics that should be considered, more qualitative metrics that are as important, which really speak to user experience. Because again, to the extent that you start to boil down user experience into merely a dollar and cents argument, it's a dangerous conversation to initiate. That's my 2 cents. Again, you could totally disagree with me, and I'd be perfectly comfortable with that. Maybe our time is best spent having that conversation, because I'll talk about some of that in my lightning talk, but I don't have definitive answers. But I do know this to be true. Every designer I've ever known to even entertain those conversations and try to say, oh, trust me, if we focus on service and I'm going to largely arbitrarily, as business professionals do, will say, hey, I think that we can increase sales by 10%. Well, then suddenly every conversation about customer experience and user experience becomes an argument about percentage of increase in sales or cost reduction, which just feels anathema to design to me. I mean, it seems to fly in the face and undermine the core value of what design provides to an organization. I don't know if that makes any sense. Maybe I'm just philosophical meanderings and Travis's brain rolling around, but
Yeah, I agree, and I like that you call that out as being a dangerous road to go down. And but then I'm also trying to bridge. You know, you're starting with someone who's asking that initial question. How do you bridge it? So, but
I
it's good
agree.
feedback.
Well, no, I agree, and I wish I did have a definitive answer. I've not seen. Well, in this last minute you spent with me today, and I certainly hope that you took some value out of this. But I'll talk more about this on Friday as well. I wish I did have definitive answers here, and you know that even with students I've had in the class, they're like, well, how do we do that? You know, if I'm in an organization and all I care about is profitability or operational efficiency, and you're suggesting to me that I go into the organization and tell them that the value of what I'm doing isn't directly connected to that, how do I make that argument? And, you know, I say that my first thing, I think I was frozen for a moment, but my argument is that those aren't easy conversations. I mean, I don't. I mean, I think that's part of the argument, and the reason that we find that challenging really gets back to the heart of this conversation: why organizations don't think about design as being strategically relevant or important, because and so in turn, designers feel compelled to try to make their arguments in a manner or put it in language that organizations understand. And I guess I'll end on this challenging note, which is it's really the challenge for designers to get leadership to understand a different language and to broaden their perspective when it comes to achieving their strategic goals. That's really the point of all this. So I didn't get to every single thing I wanted to talk with you all about, but I will speak more about that on Friday. But it's a challenge, but you know, it's certainly a conversation worth continuing because this has been going on. I showed you a lot of writings for well over 10 years old, and I'm still having the exact same conversations with the professional designers. So this conversation won't be ending anytime soon. So I appreciate you taking the time. I don't need to leave, but I'm suspecting that you have other places to be than hanging out with me, which is as it should be. But I'll sit here for the time being if it's useful.
I would allow you to sit here, but I actually have to log off, which will close the session, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Well, hey everyone, if you need me, you can find me at Indiana University. Just email me, and I'm happy to continue the conversation. But again, I have a lightning talk for 15 minutes on Friday, and I'll touch on some things I didn't get to today. Okay.
We also do have, along with those talks and things, we'll have our networking rooms open. So if you're available to enter one of those, we can have like an extended conversation. That would definitely be something that I'd be interested in. But we can have like long form conversations in our networking space when they're open, Wednesday through Friday.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. This was awesome. Despite technical difficulties.
Used to it.